Okay, so hello all wonderful learners. I'm going to start today an LAQ writing which will be on question taken from CNS. So we are going to start with ascending tracts, right? And today we will be discussing the dorsal, that is also called as the posterior column tract. And I'll be also telling you how to write an LAQ over this. Before that, let me tell you, I invite you all to please share my channel, Dr. Reena's Physiology, to as many as possible so that physiology can be easy and accessible for one and for many. You can also join my Telegram channel, that is Physiology Synapse to Success, for getting the notes which I take on this channel. Now, today's question which I'm going to elaborate is, this is an LAQ. Enumerate the various ascending pathways and describe the pathway of touch, fine touch from periphery to cortex. देखो क्वेश्चन को अच्छे से सुनो. Enumerate, that means you have to just write down the various ascending pathways, that is the name of the pathways, and you have to describe the pathway of fine touch. That means touch is of two types. If it is fine, that means something definitely is also there. So once you look into the question, you have to be very specific what is asked, right? Otherwise you will never be able to complete it and actually write what is required. So this is the diagrammatic representation of the different pathways. The dorsal column, that is fasciculus gracilis cuneatus, spinocerebellar, and the anterolateral system. However, you can classify the ascending tracts as depending upon their position in the spinal cord, right? What position do they take in the spinal cord? So those which are present in the dorsal column, that is over here in the dorsal column, are fasciculus gracilis and fasciculus cuneatus. Those which are present in the lateral white column, okay, so the lateral white column are lateral spinothalamic and the dorsal and ventral spinocerebellar, and those which are in the ventral, or that is the anterior column, is the ventral spinothalamic tract or the anterior spinothalamic tract. So this is what is enumerate the different tracts. I hope you all have listened the basic structure where I have explained you the cross section of a spinal cord, because it is very important to understand the gray matter and the white matter. Otherwise you will never even realize the positioning of the tracts, where it is when you will say white matter column and the gray matter. So आपको अच्छे से पता होना चाहिए. Now once we say it is a tract, what is a tract basically? How do you define a tract? So a tract is a bundle of nerve fibers. Okay, a tract is a bundle of the nerve fibers which are located in the CNS, and that has got same orientation and carries same sensation. So let us make it very simple. Now this is the spinal cord. Okay, so this is the spinal cord, and lots of the nerve fibers, they are going to enter through the spinal cord. Touch, pain, temperature, proprioception, kinesthesia, and so many. Once they enter the spinal cord, there is going to be a rearrangement of the fibers, right? There is going to be the rearrangement of the fibers, and those which are carrying same sensation, right? Those which are carrying same sensation will be bundled together. Okay, they will be bundled together. For example, there is a wool, red wool, white wool, so one color means one bundle. So a tract is actually, if you want to define a tract, it is actually, a tract is the fibers or a bundle of fibers which carry same sensation, which could be motor, which could be sensory, and sensory may be same type. When you come to ascending tracts are those tracts which carry information all the way from the periphery to your central nervous system. The body is made up of nerve fibers, right? So suppose there is touch, there is pain, it will be first sensed by a receptor, and the nerve fibers will carry all the way to the spinal cord, where once entering the spinal cord it will be bundled together and you will call it as a tract. Remember, this information is carried basically in the form of an electrical coded impulses or coded electrical impulses. You can better call it as a coded electrical impulses. So whatever information is carried in the brain, and therefore we have got nerve fibers, and therefore the receptor is very important, because the receptor is going to convert any form of energy into electrical energy, and therefore we call the receptor as a transducer. So that whatever is the stimulus, mechanical, chemical, thermal, it will convert it in the form of an electrical impulse, and then it will be carried up. Therefore the impulses are in the form of coded electrical impulses. Now the question, how did the question begin? The question began with fine touch, right? So let me tell you that there are two types of touch. There is crude touch and there is a fine touch. Okay, there is crude touch and there is fine touch. So this crude touch is carried by the anterior spinothalamic tract, and the fine touch is carried by the dorsal column, right? So the question which is asked now is very specific, fine touch. So we will be elaborating the dorsal column, right? But you can write that there are two types of touch, fine touch and crude touch. Crude touch is carried by the anterior spinothalamic and fine touch is by the dorsal column. So how will you begin your answer? The receptor for the touch are the Meissner's corpuscles and the Merkel's disc. These are the receptors for touch. So you need to mention, because the question is asked from the periphery. So the Meissner's corpuscles and the Merkel's disc. And you must remember that these touch receptors, they are abundantly present in the finger, especially the tips and the lips, whereas over the back comparatively they are less. The receptors are present in the head area or also in the non-head area or the glabrous skin. The fibers that carry the touch sensation are A beta fibers. So whenever you are explaining any pathway, for example, this is touch, start from the receptor and the nerve fiber. Like for pain, it will be what? The pain will be carried by free nerve endings and A delta and type C fibers. Now coming on to the sensations that this tract is carrying. So whenever you are explaining any tract, okay, whenever you are explaining any tract, you have to write about its origin, its course, its termination. You have to write about what sensation it carries and something or a few points about the applied part of the tract. So these are the points which are going to be complete LAQ. So the posterior column, which is also called as the medial lemniscal pathway, it transfers or it transmits fine touch, conscious proprioception, vibration, tactile localization, discrimination, stereognosis, deep pressure, fine gradations, and it receives maximum input from the Pacinian, from the Meissner's, from the joint receptors, from the muscle spindles, and from the GTO, right? So the question is asked touch pathway. So we are going to elaborate the touch pathway, but the touch pathway is carried by the dorsal column. So I need to mention that dorsal column is carrying all these or these many sensations. Now these the ascending pathways, they are basically having two relay stations. They are having two relay stations, and it is a three-ordered neuron pathway. Okay, three-ordered neuron pathway and two relay stations. For example, let us make it simple. Now we are all in Nagpur. Suppose we have to go to, okay, say Srinagar. Now I don't have a direct flight, so I have to go via Delhi. So I started my journey from Nagpur. This will become my first order neuron. Because it is not a direct flight to Srinagar, I need to halt at Delhi. So this is the first halt. So this will become the first relay station. And after Delhi, the journey which will begin will be the second order neuron, right? So that is how. Now suppose from Srinagar I go somewhere else. So Srinagar will become the second relay station, and these will be the third order neurons. So जहाँ से pathway start होता है, जहाँ से भी pathway start होता है, that is called as the first order neuron, and then wherever they stop, they are going to become the second order, and then the third order, and the first stop is going to constitute the first relay station. Now let me take it very simple before I teach you through the pictures which are given in the book. Now you have got this spinal cord, okay, and this is the dorsal horn and this is the ventral horn of the spinal cord, and this is the dorsal root ganglion. What is this? This is the dorsal root ganglion. It is supposed to be a pseudo unipolar neuron. What is a pseudo unipolar neuron? It is like this. There is one axon which is coming from the periphery, and there is another axon which is coming from the which is going towards the center. So it has got no dendrites. Both of these are axons, and therefore it is called as a pseudo unipolar neuron, right? Now the touch pathway, it will begin from the receptors, which will be your touch receptors, and the nerve fibers will be A beta, and these are going to go all the way to this dorsal root ganglion. That is the first order neuron, okay? It is the first order neuron. From here, these fibers are going to ascend up in the dorsal column, and there is no crossing in the spinal cord. So they ascend up and they are going to halt in the medulla. This medulla is going to be the first relay station because they halted for the first time. So this dorsal column is the fasciculus gracilis and the fasciculus cuneatus. So the nuclei become the nucleus gracilis and the nucleus cuneatus, nucleus gracilis and nucleus cuneatus, and then they are going to cross. So the crossing is shown after relaying in the medulla, and these are your second order neurons, which will go all the way to the thalamus, and you can see that there is crossing. So this is very important that where is crossing, because when we study the anterolateral pathways, the pain and temperature, their crossing will take place in the spinal cord, but the crossing of these fibers is going to take place after medulla. You will understand this clinical importance when I teach you Brown-Sequard syndrome after I complete the sensory tracts. So this is the relay in the second, this is the second relay station because they have halted for the second time, and the fibers will be the third order neurons. Which are going to go all the way to the somatosensory cortex. Do you know where is the somatosensory cortex? It is the postcentral gyrus in the parietal cortex, which is Brodmann's area 3, 1 and 2. So now what happens ki many of the words are really alien to you. What is 3, 1, 2? These are all Brodmann's sensory areas which you will learn when you learn the cortex. For now, remember that first order neuron is the dorsal root ganglion. First relay station is medulla. No crossing in the spinal cord, and beyond the medulla there will be crossing. They will then relay in the thalamus, and after relaying in the thalamus, these fibers are now going to go to the cortex. Now something very important. You must know that there are two thalamus. So there will be thalamic nuclei on the right side and on the left side. So the fibers which take origin from the right side, okay, from the right hand or from the right leg, they are going to cross and they are going to go to the left thalamic nuclei, and from there to the left cortex. So the presentation of the body is contralateral, right? So the right sided is going to be presented on the left cortex and vice versa. So from the right, after crossing in the medulla, they are going to go to the left thalamus, from the left thalamus to the left cortex, right? So this is very clear. Now once you understand this, let us make this topic a bit more interesting for you. How am I going to make it more interesting for this is, now suppose you are carrying something in your hand. with your eyes closed, that is called as stereognosis. So it is upper limb. And suppose there is a sensation from the lower limb. So both of these are different. So the sensations from the upper limb are carried by fasciculus cuneatus. Remember, eat. How do we eat? From mouth. It is up. So remember, upper limb sensations, that is basically your cervical and your upper thoracic. Upper thoracic will be by cuneatus. Lower limb, that is fasciculus gracilis. How do we walk? How do we walk? We walk gracefully. So lower limb, fasciculus gracilis, that is mainly your lumbar and your lower thoracic fibers. Okay, your lower thoracic fibers. ठीक है, fasciculus gracilis cuneatus, cuneatus from the upper limb and gracilis from the lower limb. Very clear, because this comes as MCQ also. Now let's detail the pathway. This is the basic pathway which I expect everyone should know, but a more detailing of the pathway. Now, on entering the spinal cord through the spinal nerve roots, which are actually the myelinated fibers which are coming from the mechanoreceptors, that is the the touch receptors, the Meissner's and the Merkel's. These fibers, they enter the dorsal column, I told you. They divide to synapse with many local neurons in the intermediate and in the anterior portion of the grey matter. They will form local, or they will form synapse with the small neurons over there. Majority of them, they are going to ascend up in the dorsal column. They are going to form the tract, that is the fasciculus gracilis and cuneatus. They will go up and they will travel all the way to the brain, to the sensory cortex. But some of them are going to terminate locally in the spinal cord grey matter, which will be important to elicit the local spinal cord reflexes, and some of them will give rise to the fibers in the origin of the spinocerebellar tracts. So majority of the fibers will ascend up and they will form the dorsal column. Few of them giving inputs to the spinocerebellar tract, and few of them terminating locally, so they will form the local spinal cord reflexes. So if this is possible for you, learn this, or अगर possible नहीं है तो at least ये वाला point, dorsal column वाला point, you should remember. Now let us take this in the form of a flow chart, because I expect that whenever we are writing an LAQ over over your pathways, either draw it in the form of a diagram, label there and write there, or pathway in the form of a flow chart. So the receptors for the fine touch, vibration, proprioception, this I am including the entire dorsal column. However, the question अभी जो मैंने डाला था सिर्फ fine touch पर था. So dorsal root ganglion is the first order neuron. From there, the tractus gracilis and the cuneatus, they are going to end, or they are going to relay in the nucleus gracilis and cuneatus. That is the medulla. This is going to be your first relay station. Okay, it is going to be our first relay station, from where the second order neurons will go to the opposite side, because there is no crossing in the spinal cord. Now there they form the medial lemniscus. What is this medial lemniscus? This is a major sensory decussation. Okay, this is a major sensory decussation which takes place behind the pyramids. Okay, which takes place behind the pyramids, and after this major sensory decussation, the tract that is formed will be named as your medial lemniscus. So we have seen that after the medulla and behind the medullary pyramids, there is sensory decussation, which is a major sensory decussation. There is formation of the medial lemniscus. This medial lemniscus will now end up in the thalamus. This thalamus, we know it is the second relay station. Okay, the thalamus is the second relay station. The thalamus is full of nuclei. So it is mainly the ventrobasal complex, or you can remember ventral posterolateral nuclei. Ventral posterolateral nuclei, or the ventrobasal complex, from where the third order neurons, they are going to end up in the somatosensory cortex, area number 3, 1 and 2. So this is the pathway, basically an elaborated pathway, and at least this much is expected from you. But if you want to know a bit deeper part of it. You can also, learn this in the form of external and internal arcuate fibers. What is that now? Now, when these fibers, they come into the medulla, when these fibers, they come here over into the spinal cord, okay, and they're going to ascend up. These fibers, they form something which is called as the external arcuate fibers and the internal arcuate fibers. Okay, external arcuate fibers, internal arcuate fibers. If you want to remember, you can remember. If you are not able to remember, it is okay. So some of these fibers, they are going to be the form of the crossed, that is dorsal column, and some of them are going to give the fibers which are not going to ascend up, but they will go all the way to the cerebellum, because they are carrying important sensations like proprioception, and the cerebellum has to be kept aware about the position of the body. So after dividing into external, internal arcuate fibers, few of them are going to go into the cerebellum, and the majority of them are going to be your dorsal column tract, right? Now you can get a 2 marks BAQ, or you have to write it in the form of LAQ also, that there are certain very important peculiarities of the dorsal column which are not present in the anterolateral column. First is that it is composed of large myelinated nerve fibers which have got a conduction velocity of 30 to 110 meters per second. It shows a very high degree of spatial orientation of fibers. That means the rearrangement of the fibers which have started all the way from the spinal cord will go up in the thalamus and in the cortex, and will maintain that spatial orientation or the organization. It is maintained throughout the pathway. Like in the spinal cord, the lower part of the body lies towards the center of the cord. I'll explain you this. And the upper part of the body is laterally. I have also put on an MCQ on this, which was a last NEET PG question, that when you push or when you hit the spinal cord from lateral side, the first fibers to be affected will be cervical. That is what is the question or this explanation is telling you. Even in the thalamus, you will see that a distinct orientation is maintained, where the tail end of the body is present more laterally, and the head and the face are presented more in the medial. So you can see the lower extremity is more laterally, whereas the face and the upper extremity are presented more medially in the ventrobasal complex of the thalamus. Now this is very, very important, that is the arrangement of the fibers. Now as we have discussed that the fasciculus gracilis is carrying from the lower limb. So up till the lower thoracic region, right? Up till the lower thoracic region, that means lumbar se leke thoracic. So lower thoracic region mein you will find that this fasciculus gracilis is occupying it occupies whole of the पोस्टीरियर कॉलम. तो पूरा का पूरा जो पोस्टीरियर कॉलम है, जो स्पाइनल कॉर्ड का ये पूरा पोस्टीरियर कॉलम है, ये पूरा पोस्टीरियर कॉलम, इट इज ओनली ऑक्यूपाइड बाय द fasciculus gracilis. But as we move up, that means upper thoracic and then the cervical, there is appearance of the fibers coming from the upper limb, that is your cuneatus. So the cuneatus will now push the gracilis towards medial side. So this is very important, that the arrangement of the fibers, if you look into the spinal cord dorsal column, is like this. Most medially there is sacral fibers. Most medially there is sacral fibers. उसके बाद lumbar, उसके बाद thoracic, and last is cervical. So if you see from lateral to medial, बाहर से अंदर की तरफ, it will be cervical, thoracic, lumbar and sacral. CTLS from lateral to medial, and this is a very important basis of your MCQ. Very important. When we study the pain pathway, this is location, and you will see that यहाँ पर the arrangement of the fibers is totally different, right? So please remember that this is a very important LAQ. Starting from the receptors, the pathway, its course, its termination, how to draw in the simplified form which I have taken, because when you look into the textbooks will give you a sophisticated drawing. See, upper half of the body, lower half of the body, first order neuron going into the spinal cord, and in the spinal cord there is no crossing. This has to be learnt very nicely. in the spinal cord, there is no crossing of the fibers. They ascend up and they are having the first relay station in the nucleus gracilis, nucleus cuneatus, after which they cross. This is the internal arcuate fibers going all the way upwards, which is going to form the medial lemniscus, the second order neurons forming the medial lemniscus, and then ending up in the ventral posterolateral nucleus of thalamus, or the ventrobasal complex. They go to the thalamus, and from there to area 312, and fibers, they also go to the somatosensory area 1. You have got two sensory areas, 1 and 2, that is primary and secondary. 1, Roman letter 1 and 2. Right? So this is how there is description which is given in the books. But when you have to draw, you can just draw it as simple as this, because nobody is going to test your drawing, just how the tract is passing through its pathway. Now you must remember that there are certain conditions which can affect the dorsal column. So you must remember at least 1, 2, 3. See, very common is a vitamin B12 deficiency. This is called as subacute combined degeneration of spinal cord. Subacute combined degeneration of spinal cord. It can be affected with multiple sclerosis. You might have heard this, multiple sclerosis, which is a very severe demyelinating disease. It can be affected with peripheral neuropathy. Okay, with peripheral neuropathy. It can be also affected with GB syndrome, Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is also a kind of a demyelinating disease of the periphery. जैसे ये center की है multiple sclerosis, ये periphery की है, right? So this is all about the dorsal column, highlighting points that crossing is not taking place in the spinal cord. It is after the spinal cord, that is beyond the medulla. So this is the most important point when we will study the hemisection of spinal cord. So this is all. If you like it, please put a like, put a comment, and take all the notes from my Telegram group. Thank you and God bless you all.